A capybara sitting calmly while a dozen animals climb on its back. A grizzly bear that weighed 400 kilograms charged without warning and ended a decade-long domestication attempt overnight. A fox that, after just 40 years of selective breeding, started wagging its tail like a golden retriever. These are not random facts. They're evidence for one of the strangest puzzles in all of natural history. Because out of hundreds of thousands of animal species on Earth, humans have only ever successfully domesticated around 14 large ones. 14. In 10,000 years of trying. So the real question isn't which animal we should domesticate next. The real question is why that number is so embarrassingly low, and whether there's a species alive today that's quietly been waiting for us to notice it. The answer is stranger than you'd expect, and it starts with a mistake almost everyone makes. Most people think taming and domesticating are the same thing. They are not. A tiger raised from a cub by hand can be tame. It might come when you call it, sleep beside you, let children pet it. But if you released that tiger's offspring into the wild and tried to tame them too, you'd be starting completely from scratch. Nothing has changed in the genes. The tiger is not domesticated. It's just one individual that got used to you. Domestication is different. It's what happens when an entire species changes, genetically, physiologically, behaviorally, across many generations because of its relationship with humans. That's why we can walk into any city in the world and pick up a random stray dog and within weeks have a companion. The domestication is already in there, baked into the DNA over 15,000 years. That's the bar, and it turns out almost nothing in the animal kingdom can clear it. Here's why. A biologist named Jared Diamond spent years studying which animals had been domesticated and which hadn't. He noticed a pattern. It wasn't that untamed species were too dangerous or too dumb. It was that they failed one or more of 6 very specific requirements. Miss even one, and the whole project collapses. The first requirement is diet. Domesticated animals need to be cheap to feed. Cattle eat grass. Pigs eat almost anything. But a large predator needs meat, which means you're essentially farming one animal to feed another. The math never works. Second is growth rate. A useful animal has to reach full size quickly. A cow takes about 2 years. An elephant takes 15. In prehistoric terms, an animal that takes 15 years to mature before it can pull a plow isn't a farm asset. It's a 15-year liability before it ever does a day of work. Third is captive breeding. This one eliminated more candidates than you'd think. Cheetahs, for instance, seem like perfect candidates. They're fast, trainable, relatively calm around humans. Ancient Egyptians kept them as hunting companions. But cheetahs have an unusual problem. They need a long, private courtship ritual before they'll mate. In the wild, a female runs from multiple males for hours, sometimes days. The male that keeps up longest wins. Put them in an enclosure and that ritual falls apart. For thousands of years, every cheetah kept by humans had to be caught in the wild as a cub. No captive bred population ever got started. One missing checkbox and an entire species is out. If you can think of an animal that almost made it, a species you'd nominate as the next candidate, or one you're sure should have been domesticated by now, drop the name in the comments. I'll be reading. Some of the more interesting suggestions on this channel have come from down there. Fourth is temperament, specifically how the animal responds to stress. This is where zebras fail spectacularly. Zebras look almost identical to horses. They're the same size, they live in herds, they eat grass. On paper, they should have been domesticated in Africa the same way horses were domesticated in Central Asia. But zebras are genuinely difficult animals. They bite, and they don't let go. They have an almost paranoid awareness of threats. They are, in the language of one researcher, pathologically anti-cooperative. Colonial-era explorers tried for decades to ride them, work them, breed them selectively. It never took. The genes for calm simply weren't distributed widely enough in the population to select for. Fifth is panic response. Some animals flee in open panic when threatened. They scatter unpredictably. Others, cattle, horses, sheep, form a group and move together. Animals that stampede chaotically can't be herded. Animals that stay together can. It sounds like a small thing. It's not. Sixth is social hierarchy. Animals that live in dominance-ranked groups are pre-adapted to follow a leader. Insert a human at the top of that hierarchy, and the whole structure transfers over. Dogs came from wolves, which have alphas. Cattle came from aurochs, which had dominant bulls. But animals that are either solitary or have flat egalitarian social structures don't naturally slot a human into a leadership role. 6 requirements. Most animals fail 3 or 4 of them before you've even started. If you want to understand just how badly things can go wrong, look at the cases where humans tried hardest and still lost. Grizzly bears were tested in earnest during the early 20th century. They're intelligent. They can be trained to perform complex tasks. They form surprisingly strong bonds with individual handlers. But the diet problem is insurmountable. A full-grown grizzly needs enormous amounts of food, a mix of fish, berries, roots, meat that varies with the season. And more critically, even the most socialized grizzly never fully suppresses its predatory response. One bad moment, one wrong trigger, and 400 kilograms of apex predator acts like what it is. No selective breeding program ever got past that wall. Chimpanzees are perhaps the most poignant case. Cognitively, they're extraordinary. They can learn sign language, use tools, solve complex puzzles. For decades, researchers raised chimps in human households, treating them like children. The chimp, named Nim Chimpsky, learned over 100 signs. But the deeper chimps were integrated into human social life, the more one problem became undeniable. Chimpanzees' social structure is built around dominance assertion, and as they mature, they assert it, physically, aggressively, and without the inhibitions that thousands of years of domestication built into dogs. Adult chimps that were raised as children have seriously injured their human families. The cognitive capacity is there, the social compatibility isn't. Diamond's 6th checkbox, social hierarchy, is the one that kills the chimp candidacy. Which brings us to the experiments that actually worked, or almost worked. The most important one started in 1959 in Siberia. A Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belayev had a theory. He believed that domestication wasn't primarily about selecting for useful traits like strength or meat production. He believed the key variable was a single behavioral trait: tameness toward humans. If you selected only for that, he thought, everything else might follow. So he started with wild silver foxes and applied one rule. The only foxes allowed to breed were the ones that showed the least fear and aggression toward human handlers. Not the biggest, not the healthiest, just the calmest. Within 10 generations, he had foxes that would approach human handlers voluntarily. Within 20, they were seeking out human contact. By the 40th generation, which took only about 4 decades because foxes breed fast, something remarkable had happened. The foxes didn't just behave differently, they looked different. Floppy ears, curled tails, spotted coats. They barked and whined in ways wild foxes don't. They made eye contact and held it. The biological explanation is that genes controlling tameness are physically linked to genes controlling development and appearance. When you select one, you unconsciously select a cluster. It's the same package of changes that turned wolves into dogs. Belyaev had essentially replicated the first phase of dog domestication in 40 years in a controlled laboratory setting. The foxes passed all 6 of Diamond's checks. Diet is manageable. Growth rate is fast. Captive breeding works. Temperament is now selectable. Panic response is reduced. Social hierarchy adapts to include humans. The Belyaev foxes are the closest thing we have to proof that a new domestication is genuinely possible. There are other candidates worth naming. The capybara, the world's largest rodent native to South America, passes several of Diamond's filters with surprising ease. It's a large herbivore. It's social. It has a calm temperament. It breeds readily in captivity, and it already coexists with humans and other animals with unusual ease. There's something almost eerie about how relaxed capybaras are. They've been called the most chill large animal on Earth, and that's not an exaggeration. Whether that translates into full domestication potential is still an open question, but the baseline is better than most. And then there's the speculative frontier. Because for most of human history, domestication meant waiting. Waiting for enough generations, enough selection pressure, enough time for the genetics to shift. That constraint is dissolving. CRISPR gene editing tools can now identify and modify specific behavioral genes in ways that would have taken centuries of selective breeding to achieve naturally. The Belyaev experiment took 40 years with foxes because foxes breed fast. Applied to a slower breeding species, the same result might have taken 400 years. With modern genomic tools, you could potentially compress that into a single generation, not by inserting foreign genes, but by amplifying variants that already exist in the population. This doesn't mean we're about to start engineering domesticated wolves or tame elephants from scratch. The ethical questions are enormous, and the science is still early. But it does mean the bottleneck that stopped our ancestors, time, no longer applies in the same way. The 6-trait filter still exists. The biology still has to work. But the speed at which we could run that experiment has changed by orders of magnitude. Which raises a question Diamond never had to ask. If we can now domesticate almost anything that passes the 6-trait filter, what do we actually want? Our ancestors domesticated animals because they needed food, labor, transportation. Those problems are largely solved. The next domesticated species, if there is one, won't be chosen for utility. It'll be chosen for something harder to define. Companionship, maybe, or the simple fact that a species proved it could build a life alongside us. That's what happened with cats. Nobody decided to domesticate them. They showed up where the food was, the most tolerant ones stayed, and over thousands of years a partnership emerged that neither side planned. The cat is domesticated not because humans selected it, but because one population of wildcats found that living near humans worked better than not. If there's a species alive today starting down that same path, we probably won't recognize it until long after the process has begun. Urban foxes already read human body language. Crows remember individual human faces and pass that knowledge to their offspring. Some bird populations have learned to use traffic patterns as tools. Evolution didn't stop. It's just running in a different direction now, shaped by a world we built. The domestication window isn't closed. It was never really about what we chose. It was always about which species proved it could choose us back. If this kind of question pulls at you, why animals behave the way they do, what's still possible between species, there's more coming. Subscribe so you catch it when it lands.